Found behind a waterfall after 18 years, the truth behind a missing teen. The water roared, a constant thunder that had been the soundtrack to my life for 18 years. It was the sound of forgetting, the sound of a town that had moved on, but for me, it was the sound of a promise I couldn't keep. The mist from Serenity Falls clung to my skin, cold and damp, just like the secret I'd carried since I was a boy. 18 years ago, I stood on this very same cliff edge, a scrawny, terrified 16-year-old, and watched the life I knew shatter into a million pieces. Today, I was a man, a deputy sheriff, and I was back to break the silence. The call had come in an hour ago. A couple of hikers, off the main trail, exploring the caves behind the falls, a place no one ever went. They'd found something. Or someone. The dispatcher's voice was tight, strained. They said it looks like a body, Ethan. A skeleton dressed in old clothes, old clothes. The words echoed in the hollow space in my chest. I knew what old meant. It meant, from a time before the new millennium, before the town decided to pave over its ghosts. It meant, from my time, from her time, my partner, Dave, a stout man, with a kind face and worry lines etched deep into his forehead, clapped a heavy hand on my shoulder. "You all right, Ethan? You look like you've seen a ghost." I wished it was just a ghost. Ghosts were memories. This was bone and cloth, and the bitter taste of regret. "I'm fine," I lied, my voice hoarse. "Let's just get this done." We rappelled down the slick, moss-covered rocks, the spray from the waterfall soaking our uniforms. The roar was deafening here, a physical force that vibrated through my bones. The cave was a dark, gaping mouth behind the shimmering curtain of water. It smelled of wet earth, decay, and something else. Something metallic and wrong. The hikers, a young couple with pale, stricken faces, were huddled near the entrance, wrapped in emergency blankets. The woman was crying softly, her boyfriend staring into the darkness with wide, unseeing eyes. He pointed a trembling finger. "In there past that big rock, we didn't touch anything. We just saw." Dave went in first, his flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. I followed, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs, a drumbeat of dread. The air grew colder, heavier. The sound of the waterfall was muffled now, a distant, angry rumble. And then I saw it. The beam of my flashlight fell upon a small, huddled shape in a narrow alcove. It wasn't just a skeleton. It was a person, preserved by the cool, damp air. The clothes were faded, but I recognized them instantly. A pair of worn Levi's, a purple flannel shirt, and a silver locket, tarnished, but still hanging around the delicate bones of the neck. My breath hitched. The world tilted on its axis. It was her. It was Maya. She was curled on her side, as if sleeping. Her long dark hair, now a matted tangle, was spread around her skull. One skeletal hand was tucked under her cheek, the other clutched a small, leather-bound book to her chest. Her diary. "Oh God," Dave whispered, his voice thick with emotion. He'd known her too. Everyone in our small town had known Maya. She was the golden girl, the one with the infectious laugh and the bright, hopeful eyes, the one who had vanished without a trace 18 years ago. They'd searched for months. The whole town had combed the woods, the river, every abandoned cabin and old mineshaft for miles. They'd suspected runaway, they'd suspected abduction. They'd suspected everything except the one thing I knew to be true. I knelt beside her, my legs trembling. My flashlight beam traced the delicate curve of her jaw, the empty sockets where her vibrant eyes used to be. The silver locket gleamed in the light. I remembered the day she got it. Her 16th birthday. She'd been so proud of it. A gift from her grandmother. "It's her," I choked out, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "It's Maya." Dave put a hand on my back, a silent gesture of comfort. He knew our history. He knew we'd been inseparable, two halves of the same whole. He just didn't know the whole story. No one did. My gaze fell on the diary clutched in her hand. Her secrets, our secrets. I reached out, my fingers brushing against the cold, brittle leather. I had to know. I had to know what she'd written in those final terrifying moments. As My fingers closed around the book. A small metallic object fell from its pages and clattered onto the rocky ground. It was a key, a small, ornate, old-fashioned key. I'd never seen it before. "What's that?" Dave asked, leaning closer. I picked it up, the cold metal biting into my skin. It was heavy, solid. A key to what? A locker, a box, a secret. Suddenly, a memory, sharp and brutal, pierced through the fog of my grief. A memory I had suppressed. For 18 years, a face, a voice, a threat. You say a word, and she's not the only one who'll disappear. The voice belonged to a man who is now the most powerful person in our town. A man who had built an empire on a foundation of lies and secrets. A man who had been my father's best friend, and my worst nightmare. Sheriff Thompson. He'd been there that night. He'd been the one to find me, wandering in the woods, covered in mud and blood. My mind a blank slate of trauma. He'd been the one to comfort me, to tell me it was all a terrible accident, that Maya had run away, that I was lucky to be alive. He'd been the one to tell me to forget, and I had. Or at least, I'd tried. But now, seeing Maya's body, holding this key, the carefully constructed walls of my memory began to crumble. I looked at Dave, my eyes wild with a dawning horror. "We need to get this back to the lab. Everything, the diary, the key, all of it." "Of course," he said, his brow furrowed with concern. "Ethan, are you sure you're okay? You look like you're about to be sick." I wasn't just sick, I was terrified. Because I knew, with a chilling certainty, that this wasn't just a tragic discovery. It was a message, a warning. And I knew who it was from. As we carried Maya's remains out of the cave, the roar of the waterfall sounded different. It was no longer the sound of forgetting. It was the sound of a reckoning. Back at the station, the air was thick with a somber, heavy silence. The news had spread like wildfire through our small town. Maya found after all these years. The phones were ringing off the hook, reporters from the city, locals offering condolences. Their voices a mixture of shock and morbid curiosity. I sat at my desk, the small leather-bound diary and the ornate key laid out before me. The coroner had taken Maya's body, but these two items were now in my custody. Evidence. The key to everything. Sheriff Thompson was in his office. The door closed. I could hear his muffled voice, calm and authoritative, as he spoke to the press. He was controlling the narrative, just like he always did. He was the hero, the one who had never given up hope, the one who had finally brought closure to a grieving town. But I knew the truth. He wasn't a hero, he was a monster. My hands trembled as I reached for the diary. It was stiff, the pages warped by years of dampness. The leather was cracked and peeling. I hesitated, my heart pounding. Did I have the right to read her final words? To invade her privacy, even in death? But then I thought of her, curled up in that cold, dark cave, alone for 18 years. I thought of the life she'd lost, the future she'd never have, and I knew I had to. For her, for the justice she deserved. I took a deep breath and opened the book. The first few pages were filled with her familiar, bubbly handwriting. Stories. About school, her friends, her dreams of leaving our small town and seeing the world. It was like hearing her voice again, a ghost whispering in my ear. Then, the tone began to change. The entries became shorter, more frantic. Her handwriting grew spidery, almost illegible. She wrote about being followed, about feeling watched. She wrote about a secret she'd discovered, a secret that put her in danger. "He knows," she wrote on one of the last pages. "He knows I know. He said he'd kill me if I told anyone. He said he'd make it look like an accident. No one would ever find me." My blood ran cold. She never used his name, but I knew who she meant. The last entry was dated the day she disappeared. It was just a few words, scrawled across the page in a shaky hand. "The old mill. He's taking me to the old mill. He says he just wants to talk. I'm scared. Ethan, if you're reading this, I'm so sorry. I love you." A single, tear-shaped smudge blurred the ink. The old mill, It had burned down years ago, a suspected arson, but at the time, it had been abandoned, a place where teenagers went to drink and hang out, a place where secrets could be buried. I slammed the diary shut, my mind reeling. It was all there. The proof, the motive, the location. I looked at the key in my hand. The old mill. Was there something there? A locker, a hidden room, a place where he'd kept his secrets. Suddenly, the door to Thompson's office opened. He stood there, his face a mask of feigned sympathy. He was older now, his hair grey at the temples, but his eyes were the same. Cold, calculating, and utterly devoid of emotion. "Ethan," he said, his voice smooth as silk. "A word, please." I stood up, my legs unsteady. My hand closed around the key in my pocket, the sharp edges digging into my palm. "Of course, Sheriff," I said, my voice barely a whisper. I followed him into his office, the door closing behind me with a soft, ominous click. The room was filled with plaques and awards, testaments to a lifetime of service and deception. He sat down behind his large mahogany desk and gestured for me to take a seat. "This is a difficult day for all of us," he began, his voice laced with a carefully crafted sadness. "Poor Maya. To be found like that, after all this time, it's a tragedy." I said nothing, my eyes fixed on his face, searching for a crack in the facade. "I know this must be especially hard for you, Ethan," he continued, his gaze softening with a practiced empathy. "You two were so close. I remember it like it was yesterday." He paused, letting the silence hang in the air. Then, his voice dropped, becoming a low, menacing purr. "That's why I need to know, Ethan. Did you find anything else in that cave, anything unusual?" My heart hammered against my ribs. He knew about the diary, he knew about the key. He was testing me, trying to see how much I remembered, how much I knew. I met his gaze, my own eyes cold and hard. "Just her body, Sheriff, and a locket." He smiled, a slow, chilling smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Good," he said. "That's good. We wouldn't want to complicate things, would we? Not after all this time." He stood up and walked over to a locked filing cabinet in the corner of the room. He pulled a key from his pocket, a key that was identical to the one in my hand. He unlocked the cabinet and pulled out a small metal box. He placed the box on his desk and opened it. Inside, nestled on a bed of black velvet, was a single, tarnished, silver bullet. My blood turned to ice. I remembered that bullet. I remembered the gun it came from. I remembered the sound it made as it tore through the night. "You know, Ethan," Thompson said, his voice a soft, deadly whisper, "some things are better left buried. For everyone's sake." He picked up the bullet and rolled it between his thumb and forefinger, his eyes never leaving mine. It was a threat, clear and unmistakable. He was reminding me of what he was capable of. He was reminding me of the power he held over me, over the entire town. I stood up, my chair scraping against the floor. I had to get out of there. I had to think. I had to find a way to expose him, to get justice for Maya, without getting myself killed in the process. "Thank you for your concern, Sheriff," I said, my voice tight. "I'll let you know if anything else comes up." I turned and walked towards the door, my hand on the doorknob. "Ethan," he called out, his voice stopping me in my tracks. I turned back to face him. He was holding the key, dangling it from his fingers. "Be careful," he said, his eyes glinting with a cold, predatory light. "It's a dangerous world out there. You never know what you might find in the dark." I walked out of his office and didn't look back. The weight of the secret I'd carried for 18 years was nothing compared to the weight of the truth I now held in my hands. And I knew, with a terrifying certainty, that this was just the beginning. The waterfall had given up its dead, but the storm was just starting to brew, and I was standing right in the middle of it. Maya was the sun around which my small world revolved. She wasn't just the girl next door. She was the other half of my soul. We'd grown up together, our houses separated by a patch of unruly woods that we'd claimed as our own kingdom. Her laughter was the soundtrack to my childhood, a bright, tinkling melody that could make even the greyest Oregon day feel like summer. She had a way of looking at you, her head tilted slightly, her dark eyes full of a fierce, unblinking curiosity. That made you feel like you were the only person in the world. She saw the parts of me I tried to hide, the shy, awkward boy who preferred books to people, the kid who was afraid of his own shadow. And she didn't just see them, she loved them. Her father had left when she was 10, a quiet phantom-like man who simply faded out of their lives, leaving behind a void that her mother, a fragile, bird-like woman named Clara, tried to fill with nervous energy and overprotective affection. Maya was fiercely protective of her mother, but she carried the weight of her father's abandonment like a stone in her pocket. A constant, tangible reminder of the fragility of love. It made her crave stability, loyalty, a love that was as constant as the roar of Serenity Falls. She found that in me, our secret spot was an old, abandoned treehouse deep in the woods between our houses. It was our sanctuary, a place where we could escape the prying eyes of the world and just be ourselves. We'd spend hours there, talking about everything and nothing, our dreams, our fears, the suffocating smallness of our town. She wanted to be a writer, to travel the world and tell stories. I just wanted to be wherever she was. The summer she turned 16, the summer she disappeared, was different. A shadow had fallen over our idyllic world. It started subtly, a change in the air, a tension that I couldn't quite name. Maya became quieter, more withdrawn. The light in her eyes seemed to dim, replaced by a flicker of fear. She started carrying her diary with her everywhere, clutching it like a talisman. Wrong? I'd ask, my voice full of a desperate, helpless concern. Nothing, she'd say, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Just stuff, but it wasn't nothing. I knew it, I could feel it. The change had a name, and that name was Richard Thompson. He wasn't Sheriff Thompson then. He was just Rich, my father's best friend, a man who was a constant presence in our lives. He was handsome, charismatic, a pillar of the community. He was a successful businessman, the owner of the local lumber mill, the biggest employer in town. He was generous, always sponsoring town events, donating to local charities. Everyone loved him. Everyone except Maya. She'd always been wary of him, even as a child. She'd shrink away from his touch, her eyes turning cold whenever he was near. I never understood it. He was always so kind to us, buying us ice cream, taking us fishing. He was like an uncle to me. But that summer, his attention shifted. It became focused, intense, and directed solely at Maya. He started showing up at her house, bringing gifts for her mother, his eyes lingering on Maya a little too long. He'd offer her rides home from school, his hand brushing against hers. As he opened the car door, he'd compliment her, his voice low and intimate. In a way that made my skin crawl, I saw the way he looked at her when he thought no one was watching. It wasn't the look of a family friend. It was the look of a predator. I tried to talk to her about it, but she'd shut me down, her face pale, her eyes wide with a fear she wouldn't name. It's nothing, Ethan, she'd insist. You're imagining things. But I wasn't. I saw the bruises on her arm, faint and finger-shaped, that she tried to hide under her long sleeves. I heard the hushed, angry whispers between her and her mother late at night. I saw the way her hand trembled when his car drove past her house. The witness to all of this, the one who saw everything and said nothing, was me. I was a silent, helpless observer, paralyzed by fear and confusion. I was a 16-year-old boy, and he was the most powerful man in town. What could I do? Who would believe me? My own home was a place of quiet, simmering tension. My father, a good man but a weak one, idolized Rich Thompson. He saw him as a symbol of everything he wasn't: successful, confident, respected. He was blind to the darkness that lurked beneath the surface, or maybe he just chose not to see it. My mother, a gentle, passive woman, deferred to my father in all things. There was no room for my fears, my suspicions, in their carefully ordered world, so I kept silent. I watched as the shadow of Rich Thompson grew longer, darker, more menacing. I watched as the light in Maya's eyes slowly died. And I did nothing. The night she disappeared, the air was thick with the smell of rain and the promise of a storm. We were supposed to meet at the treehouse, our secret sanctuary, but she never showed up. I waited for hours, my anxiety growing. With each passing minute, I called her house, but there was no answer. I ran to her house, my heart pounding in my chest, and found it empty. The front door unlocked. A single glass of spilled milk on the kitchen floor. Panic, cold and sharp, seized me. I ran into the woods, screaming her name, my voice lost in the rising wind. I stumbled through the darkness, my flashlight beam cutting a frantic path through the trees, and then I saw it. A flicker of light in the distance. The old mill. I ran towards it, my lungs burning, my mind a chaotic jumble of fear and hope. As I got closer, I heard voices, a man's voice, low and angry, and Maya's voice, high and pleading. I crept closer, my heart in my throat. I peered through a grimy window and saw them. Rich Thompson and Maya. He had her backed against a wall. His hand clamped over her mouth, her eyes were wide with terror, tears streaming down her face. Her diary was on the floor, open, its pages scattered. He was shouting at her, his voice a venomous whisper. You stupid little girl. Did you really think you could expose me? Did you really think anyone would believe you over me? He saw the diary, the open pages, the story of his abuse, his threats, his darkness, written in her elegant script. His face contorted with rage. He backhanded her, the sound a sharp, sickening crack in the silence of the mill. She crumpled to the floor, a small, broken thing. I don't remember thinking. I just remember the rage, a white-hot blinding fury that consumed me. I burst through the door, a primal scream tearing from my throat. Thompson spun around, his eyes wide with surprise, and then a cold, cruel smile spread across his face. Well, 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 he said, his voice dripping with mock amusement. Look what we have here. The little boyfriend, come to the rescue. He was bigger than me, stronger. But I didn't care. I launched myself at him, my fists flailing, my grief and rage and guilt fueling a strength I didn't know I possessed. We fought. A desperate, clumsy battle in the dusty, cavernous space of the old mill. He was toying with me, his movements precise and brutal. He landed a punch to my gut that sent me staggering back, gasping for air. He kicked my legs out from under me, and I fell to the hard, concrete floor. He stood over me, his chest heaving, a triumphant sneer on his face. He picked up a heavy metal pipe from the floor. You should have stayed out of it, kid, he said, his voice a low growl. Now, you're going to have to disappear too. He raised the pipe, and I closed my eyes, bracing for the blow. But it never came. There was a sudden, deafening roar. Not from the waterfall, but from something closer, something more final. A gunshot. I opened my eyes. Thompson was still standing over me, but his eyes were wide with a different kind of shock. A dark, spreading stain was blooming on his shirt. He looked down, a look of disbelief on his face, and then he crumpled to the floor, unconscious but alive. Standing in the doorway, silhouetted against the stormy night sky, was my father. He was holding his hunting rifle, his face a mask of grim determination. Dad, I whispered, my voice trembling. He didn't look at me. He looked at Maya, who was still on the floor, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and relief. He looked at the diary, its pages scattered like fallen leaves. He looked at the man he had called his best friend, bleeding on the floor of the old mill. And in that moment, I saw something in my father's eyes that I had never seen before. Not weakness, not denial, but a terrible dawning understanding. He knew he had known all along, and he had chosen to do nothing, until now. But his courage was short-lived. The sound of sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. Someone must have heard the gunshot. Panic seized my father. He looked at me, his eyes wild with fear. We have to go, he said, his voice a harsh whisper. Now? What about Maya? I cried, scrambling to my feet. There's no time, he said, grabbing my arm, his grip like iron. He'll destroy us all. He'll say you did it. He'll say I helped you. We have to go. He dragged me out of the mill, out into the raging storm. I looked back just once, and saw Maya, still, on the floor, her eyes following me, a silent, desperate plea, and I left her there. I let my father drag me away, away from the sirens, away from the truth, away from the girl I loved. We ran through the woods, the rain lashing down, washing away the blood and the tears. My father took me home and told me to forget. He told me that Thompson would take care of it, that he would make it all go away. He told me that Maya was gone, that she had run away, and that we were never to speak of it again. And for 18 years I had obeyed. I had buried the memory of that night so deep that I had almost convinced myself it was a dream. I had watched as Rich Thompson recovered from his hunting accident, as he spun a tale of a tragic, accidental shooting, a story my father corroborated. I had watched as he became sheriff, his power and influence growing until he owned the town. I had watched as the search for Maya slowly faded, her memory becoming a ghost story whispered by teenagers, and I had become a ghost myself. Haunted by the girl I had left behind, I joined the force, a desperate subconscious attempt to atone for my sins, to become the protector I had failed to be. I became Deputy Sheriff Ethan Hayes, a quiet, competent officer, a man who followed the rules, a man who never made waves. Until now, the Waterfall had given up its dead. The diary was in my hands, and the key was in my pocket. The key that Thompson had used to lock away his secrets. The key that would unlock the truth. The truth was, my father hadn't just been a silent witness. He was a conspirator. His silence wasn't born of weakness. It was a calculated choice, a devil's bargain to protect himself, his family, his comfortable life. He had chosen Rich Thompson over Maya, over justice, over his own son's soul. He had seen the darkness in his best friend, the way he looked at Maya, the bruises she tried to hide. He had heard the whispers, the rumors. But Thompson was his ticket to a better life, a business partner who had made him a wealthy man. And so, he had looked the other way. The gunshot that night wasn't an act of paternal protection, it was an act of self. He hadn't shot Thompson to save me. He had shot him to silence him, to stop him from revealing the depths of their shared corruption, the dirty deals and buried secrets that had built their empire. But he had failed. Thompson had survived, and my father had become his puppet, forever. Bound to him by the secret of that night, the years that followed were a slow, agonizing descent into a private hell. My father's guilt manifested as a quiet, suffocating cruelty. He became a stranger in his own home, his eyes full of a cold, dead light. He drank, his nights filled with a silent, brooding rage. He never spoke of Maya, never spoke of that night. Her name became a forbidden word, a ghost that haunted the hallways of our house. My mother, caught in the crossfire of her husband's guilt, and my silent, simmering grief, retreated into a world of her own. A fragile porcelain doll on the verge of shattering. She knew something was wrong, but she was too afraid to ask, too afraid of the answer. Our family, once a source of warmth and comfort, became a cold, lonely prison. And Thompson, he thrived. His power grew, his influence spreading like a cancer through our town. He became sheriff, a position he used to solidify his control, to intimidate his enemies, to bury his secrets even deeper. He was untouchable, a king in his own small kingdom. And we were all his subjects. He never threatened me directly, not after that night in his office. He didn't have to. His presence was a constant, chilling reminder of the power he held over me, over my family. He would drive by my house, his car slowing down, just enough for me to see his cold, knowing smile. He would call my father for late-night meetings, and my father would return hours later, his face pale, his hands trembling. He was a master of psychological warfare, his cruelty a slow, steady poison. He would accidentally mention Maya in conversation, his eyes fixed on me, watching for a flicker of emotion. He would talk about the tragedy of her disappearance, his voice laced with a sickening, feigned sympathy. He was reminding Me, that he knew, that he was in control, that he could destroy me at any moment. My only escape was the woods. The roar of the waterfall, the place where I had last seen her alive. I would go there for hours, searching for something, anything, a clue, a sign, a ghost. But there was nothing, just the endless mocking roar of the water, a constant reminder of my failure. My cowardice. The town, in its own way, was they chose to forget, to move on. Maya's disappearance became a local legend, a cautionary tale for rebellious teenagers. The search was called off, her case went cold, and life went on. It was easier that way. It was easier to believe that she had run away, that she was living a new life somewhere else, than to confront the darkness that lurked in their own backyard. But I couldn't forget, I couldn't move on. Her ghost was my constant companion, her memory a fresh, open wound that refused to heal. I saw her in the faces of other girls, in the sound of laughter, in the purple wildflowers that grew on the side of the road. Was everywhere, and nowhere, a constant, aching presence in my life. The discovery of her body was a brutal, violent awakening. It shattered the fragile peace I had built for myself, the carefully constructed walls of denial and forgetting. It brought the past rushing back, not as a hazy, half-remembered dream, but as a sharp, vivid nightmare. The diary was a testament to her courage, her defiance. Even in the face of pure evil, she had refused to be silenced. She had documented his every move, his every threat, his every act of cruelty. She had left a trail of breadcrumbs, a map for someone to follow, a last, desperate hope for justice. And the key was the final piece of the puzzle. It was a symbol of his arrogance, his hubris. He had kept a trophy, a souvenir of his crime, a secret hidden in plain sight. He believed he was untouchable, that no one would ever dare to challenge him. He was wrong. The fear was still there, a cold, hard knot in the pit of my stomach. But now, it was mixed with something else. A slow, burning rage, a fierce, unwavering determination. I was no longer the scared 16-year-old boy who had run away in the dark. I was a man, a lawman, and I had a promise to keep. I spent the next few days in a fugue state, going through the motions of my job, my mind a whirlwind of memories and plans. I reread Maya's diary until I had memorized every word, every tear-stained page. I studied the key, its ornate design, its strange, unfamiliar shape. I knew I couldn't go to the state police. Thompson had connections everywhere. He would bury the evidence, discredit me, make me look like a crazy, grief-stricken ex-boyfriend with a vendetta. I was on my own. My first stop was the old mill. It was a charred, skeletal ruin, a ghost of its former self. The fire, ruled an arson, had happened a few years after Maya's disappearance. Thompson had collected the insurance money and used it to expand his business empire. It was all so neat, so tidy. I spent hours combing through the wreckage, my hands raw, my clothes covered in soot. I was looking for a lock, a box, anything that the key might fit, but there was nothing. Just twisted metal, charred wood, and the ghosts of the past. I was about to give up when I saw it. A small metal plate on the floor, hidden under a pile of debris. It was a maker's mark, the name of a company that specialized in custom-made safes and lockboxes. I took a picture of the mark and went to the library, my heart pounding with a renewed sense of hope. I spent hours scrolling through old business directories, my eyes straining in the dim light. And then I found it. The company was based in Portland, and they had a reputation for making high-end, custom-built safes for wealthy clients. I called them, my voice disguised, and pretended to be a representative from Thompson's company, inquiring about a past order. The woman on the other end of the line was hesitant at first, citing client confidentiality. But I was persistent, dropping hints about a potential new order, a big one. Finally, she relented. She confirmed that they had built a custom safe for Richard Thompson 18 years ago, a wall safe, she said, designed to be hidden behind a loose brick in a fireplace. A fireplace. The old mill had a large stone fireplace in the main office, a fireplace that had miraculously survived the fire. Went back to the mill that night, under the cover of darkness. The air was cold, the silence broken only by the chirping of crickets and the distant roar of the waterfall. I found the fireplace, its stones blackened with soot. I ran my hands over the bricks, searching for a loose one dot, and then I found it, a single brick, slightly askew, that moved under my touch. I pulled it out, my heart hammering against my ribs. Behind it, just as the woman had said, was a small metal door, a safe. I took a deep breath and inserted the key into the lock. It fit perfectly. I turned it, and the door swung open with a soft, metallic click. Inside, there was a single object, a small, black cassette tape. My hands trembled as I took it out. A cassette tape, so old, so analog, a relic from a forgotten time. What was on it? A confession, a recording of that night. I didn't have a cassette player. They were antiques, relics of a bygone era. I went to every pawn shop, every thrift store in town. Finally, in a dusty corner of an old cluttered antique shop, I found one. A clunky portable cassette player. The kind I used to have as a kid. I took it back to my car, my hands shaking so badly I could barely insert the tape. I put on a pair of headphones, my heart pounding in my ears. I pressed play. At first, there was just static. Then, a voice. A man's voice, rough and angry. It wasn't Thompson. It was someone else. You said it would be clean, the voice snarled. You said no one would get hurt. Then, another voice. Thompson's voice, calm, cold, and utterly. Ruthless plans change, he said. She knew too much, she had to be silenced. My blood ran cold. It was a recording of a conversation. A conversation about Maya and the boy. The first voice asked, "What about him?" "He's a loose end," Thompson replied, "but his father is in my pocket. He'll keep the boy quiet. And if he doesn't, well, accidents happen." The tape continued, a chilling, detailed account of their conspiracy. They talked about Maya's body, how they'd hidden it in the cave behind the waterfall, a place no one would ever find. They talked about the fire at the mill, how they'd set it themselves to destroy any evidence. They talked about the money, the bribes, the threats. It was all there. The entire conspiracy laid bare in their own words. But who was the other man? His voice was vaguely familiar, but I couldn't place it. And then, he said something that made my world stop. "My daughter. She keeps asking questions," the man said, his voice laced with a nervous tremor. "She was friends with Maya. She thinks something's not right. You need to control your daughter," Thompson warned, his voice turning to ice. "Or I'll control her for you, my daughter." The realization hit me like a physical blow. There was only one other person who had been close to Maya, who had been her friend, who had a father who was one of Thompson's cronies, my partner. Dave. The kind, gentle man with the worry lines and the sad eyes. The man who had been by my side for the past 10 years. The man who had put a comforting hand on my back as I knelt beside Maya's body. He was the other man on the tape. His father had been one of Thompson's original business partners. A man who had died of a heart attack a few years after Maya's disappearance. Dave had inherited his father's share of the business, and his father's secrets. He had known all along. He had watched me suffer for 18 years, knowing the truth. Saying nothing that the betrayal was a bitter, suffocating poison. It was worse than Thompson's cruelty, worse than my father's weakness. It was a betrayal of friendship, of trust, of everything I thought I knew. I sat in my car, the headphones still on, the sound of their voices echoing in my ears. The world had tilted on its axis, and I was in freefall. The conspiracy wasn't just about Thompson. It was about the very foundations of our town, the men who ran it, the secrets they kept. The stakes had just been raised. This was no longer just about justice for Maya. It was about tearing down an empire of lies, no matter the cost. And I knew, with a chilling certainty, that the cost would be high. The storm I had been standing in was about to break, and it was going to destroy everything in its path. The public library became my war room. The cassette tape was my bombshell. But a tape could be dismissed, called a fabrication, a clever fake cooked up by a grieving, unstable deputy. I needed more. I needed to connect the voice on the tape to a face, to a man who was now my partner. I needed to corroborate the story, to build a case so airtight, so undeniable, that not even Richard Thompson's army of lawyers and crooked politicians could tear it down. My first move was to digitize the tape. I bought the necessary equipment, my hands steady now, my fear replaced by a cold, hard resolve. I listened to it again and again, dissecting every word, every nuance, every background noise. There was a faint, rhythmic clinking sound in the background of the recording. It was faint, but it was there. A clue. I started digging into Dave's past, into his father's life. I spent hours poring over old town records, property deeds, business licenses. His father, a man named Frank, had been a quiet, unassuming man, a silent partner in Thompson's lumber mill. He had owned a small, isolated cabin on the other side of the lake, a place he used for hunting trips. He had died there, alone, of a massive coronary. Or so the official report said. The report was signed by a young, ambitious coroner, a man who was now the chief medical examiner for the county, a man who owed his career to Sheriff Thompson. The pieces were starting to fit together, forming a dark, ugly picture. I needed to get into that cabin. It was still in Dave's name, but he rarely used it. It was a place of bad memories, he'd once told me, his eyes full of a sadness I had mistaken for grief. Now, I knew it was guilt. I waited for a day when Dave was out of town, visiting his sister in Portland. I drove out to the cabin, my heart pounding a steady rhythmic beat against my ribs. It was a small, rustic log cabin, nestled deep in the woods, miles from the nearest neighbor. The air was still, the silence broken only by the rustling of leaves and the distant cry of a hawk. The cabin was locked, but I was a cop. I knew how to get in. Inside, it was like a time capsule. Everything was covered in a thick layer of dust, the air stale and musty. It was a man's space, all dark wood and leather, a large stone fireplace dominating one wall. On the mantelpiece, there was a row of old, tarnished silver tankards, the kind you win at hunting competitions. I ran my finger over one of them, and it made a faint clinking sound as it knocked against the one next to it. The same sound I had heard on the tape. They had made the recording here. In this cabin. I searched the place from top to bottom, my adrenaline singing in my veins. I was looking for something, anything, that would connect Dave's father to the conspiracy. That would prove he was the other man on the tape. In a locked drawer of an old roll-top desk, I found it. A ledger. Inside, in Frank's neat, precise handwriting, was a detailed record of every dirty deal, every bribe, every secret that had built Thompson's empire. He had documented everything, a silent, meticulous record of his own damnation. And on the last page, there was an entry that made my blood run cold. It was dated the day after Maya's disappearance. He killed the girl, it read. He said she was a liability. He made me help him, God forgive me. Underneath, there was another entry, dated a week later. He knows I have this. He knows I'm a threat. He said he'll take care of me, just like he took care of her. I'm a dead man. It was a confession, a suicide note. Frank hadn't died of a heart attack, he had been murdered, silenced by his partner, his friend, and Dave had known. He must have found the ledger after his father's death. He had known the truth for years, and he had kept silent, a prisoner of his father's sins. A pawn in Thompson's game. I took the ledger, my hands trembling. This was it. This was the proof I needed. The tape, the ledger, the diary. It was a trifecta of truth, a weapon that could bring down an empire. But I wasn't done yet. I needed one more piece. I needed to know why. Why had Thompson targeted Maya? What was the secret she had discovered? The secret that had cost her her life. The answer, I suspected, was in the one place I hadn't looked. The one place that was so obvious, so public, that it was the perfect hiding place. The sheriff's station itself. Thompson was an arrogant man. He liked to keep his trophies close, his secrets hidden in plain sight. I remembered the locked filing cabinet in his office, the one he had opened with a key identical to the one I had found in Maya's diary. I had to get into that cabinet. I waited until the dead of night, when the station was empty, when the only person on duty was the night dispatcher, a sleepy old man who spent most of his shift watching old movies. I let myself in with my own key, my heart pounding so loud I was sure he could hear it. I crept past the dispatcher's desk, my footsteps silent on the linoleum floor. I slipped into Thompson's office, the darkness, a welcome cloak. I didn't turn on the light. I used a small penlight, its beam, a narrow, focused ray of light. The filing cabinet was locked, just as I had expected. But I was prepared. I had spent the last few days practicing, learning how to pick locks. It was a skill I had never thought I'd need, but now, it was the key to everything. My hands were steady, my movements precise. After a few tense, agonizing minutes, I heard a soft click. The lock was open. I pulled open the drawer, my breath catching in my throat. Inside, there was a single thick file. It was labeled with a name I didn't recognize, a woman's name. I opened the file. Inside, there were photographs, police reports, a death certificate. It was a cold case, a hit from 20 years ago. A young woman, a college student, had been killed on a lonely stretch of highway just outside of town. The case had never been solved. I looked at the photographs of the victim, a pretty dark-haired girl with a bright, hopeful smile, and then, I saw it. Around her neck, she was wearing a silver locket, the same locket that Maya had been wearing when she died. My mind reeled. The locket hadn't been a gift from Maya's grandmother. It had belonged to this girl. I read the police report, my eyes scanning the page, my mind racing. The investigating officer on the case had been a young, ambitious deputy named Richard Thompson. And then I saw the name of the victim's closest friend, the one who had been with her just hours before she died, the one who had been questioned by Thompson. Clara, Maya's mother. The pieces of the puzzle slammed into place, forming a picture so dark, so monstrous, that it took my breath away. Thompson hadn't just been harassing Maya, he had been stalking her, obsessed with her, because she was the spitting image of her mother. The woman he had been obsessed with. 20 years ago, the woman who had been with the victim of his first murder. He hadn't just killed a stranger in a hit and run, he had killed Clara's friend, a potential rival for her affections. And when Clara had rejected him, his obsession had festered, turning into a dark, twisted fantasy that he had projected onto her daughter. Maya hadn't just stumbled upon a secret about his business dealings. She had stumbled upon the truth about her mother's past, about the man who had been stalking their family for 2 decades. She had discovered that the man who was supposed to protect them was a monster, a murderer, a predator who had been hiding in plain sight for her entire life. The locket was his trophy, his souvenir, a symbol of his power, his depravity. He had given it to Maya, a sick, twisted gesture, a way of branding her as his own. The full, horrifying truth was laid bare before me, in the cold, sterile light of my penlight. This was a story of obsession, of murder, of a darkness that had spanned generations. I took the file, my hands shaking with a mixture of rage and revulsion. I had everything I needed. The diary, the key, the tape, the ledger, the file. It was a mountain of evidence, a tombstone for an empire of lies. I walked out of the station, the file hidden under my jacket, my mind clear, my purpose absolute. The time for secrets was over. The time for justice had come. The town hall meeting was an annual tradition, a quaint, small-town ritual where the pillars of the community gave self-congratulatory speeches and the locals aired their grievances about potholes and property taxes. It was a tedious, predictable affair, and it was the perfect stage for the final act of my play. The hall was packed. The whole town was there, a sea of familiar faces, people I had known my entire life. My father was there, sitting in the front row with the other town council members, his face a mask of bored indifference. Dave was there, standing by the door, his uniform crisp, his face etched with a weary sadness. And on the stage, at the center of it all, was Sheriff Richard Thompson. Basking in the warm glow of the spotlight, a benevolent king addressing his loyal subjects. He was in the middle of a long, rambling speech about the importance of community, of law and order, of the values that made our town great. His voice was smooth, confident, hypnotic. He had them in the palm of his hand. I waited until he was at the peak of his self-aggrandizing rhetoric, his voice ringing with a false, patriotic fervor. Then, I made my move. I walked up the center aisle, my footsteps echoing in the suddenly silent hall. All eyes turned to me, a mixture of confusion and curiosity on their faces. I saw a flicker of annoyance in Thompson's eyes, a flash of panic in my father's, a dawning horror in Dave's. I stepped onto the stage and walked to the podium, my face grim, my eyes fixed on Thompson. I was carrying a small portable cassette player and a stack of papers. "What's the meaning of this, Deputy?" Thompson demanded, his voice tight with a barely controlled rage. "The meaning of this?" "Sheriff," I said, my voice clear and steady, amplified by the microphone, "is that the truth is finally coming out." I pressed play on the cassette. Play. The sound of his voice, cold and ruthless, filled the hall. She knew too much. His recorded voice echoed through the silent, cavernous space. She had to be silenced. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. I saw confusion turn to shock, shock to dawning horror. I saw my father's face turn ashen, his eyes wide with a terror he could no longer hide. I saw Dave shrink back. Against the wall, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated fear. I let the tape play. The entire damning conversation, their voices a testament to their own evil. The story of Maya's murder, of the cover-up, of the conspiracy that had held our town hostage for 18 years, was laid bare for all to hear. When the tape was finished, a stunned, heavy silence filled the hall. No one moved, no one spoke. They just stared, their faces a mixture of disbelief and revulsion. Then, I held up the ledger, its pages filled with the meticulous record of their crimes. "This," I said, my voice ringing with a righteous fury, "is a record of every bribe, every threat, every dirty deal that built Richard Thompson's empire. It was written by Frank Miller, a man he murdered to keep him quiet." I held up the file, the photographs of the young, smiling woman, the death certificate, the police report. "And this," I said, my voice dropping to a low, menacing growl, "is the story of his first victim. A young woman he killed 20 years ago, a woman whose murder he covered up, a woman whose best friend was Clara, Maya's mother." I looked at Thompson, his face a grotesque mask of rage and disbelief. His empire was crumbling around him, his carefully constructed world shattered in a matter of minutes. "It's over. Rich," I said, my voice cold and hard, "it's all over." He lunged at me, a wild, desperate animal, his face contorted with a primal fury. But he was too late. 2 state troopers, men I had contacted in secret, men who were loyal to the law, not to a corrupt sheriff, stepped onto the stage and grabbed him by the arms. He struggled, his voice a hoarse, incoherent roar of rage and denial, but it was useless. They were strong, their grip like iron. They pulled him off the stage, his legs dragging behind him. His reign of terror over the crowd parted, a silent, stunned sea of faces, as they dragged him down the aisle and out of the hall. Then, all eyes turned to my father. He sat there, frozen, his face a pale, ghostly white. He looked at me, his eyes full of a terrible, dawning understanding. He knew that his life, his world, was over. The troopers came for him next. He didn't struggle, he just stood up. His shoulders slumped, a broken, defeated man, and let them lead him away. And then there was Dave. He was still standing by the door, his face buried in his hands, his body shaking with sobs. He was a man caught between 2 worlds, a victim of his father's sins, a prisoner of his own fear. He had made a terrible choice, a choice that had cost him his soul. But in the end, he was just another one of Thompson's victims. I walked over to him, my heart a cold, hard knot in my chest. He looked up at me, his eyes red-rimmed, his face a mess of tears and snot. "I'm sorry, Ethan," he whispered, his voice choked with a grief that was 18 years too late. "I'm so sorry." "I know, Dave," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. "I know." The troopers took him away too, his sobs echoing in the silent hall. It was over. The Empire had fallen. The monsters had been unmasked. Justice, swift and brutal and public, had been served. I stood on the stage. The tape, the ledger, the file, clutched in my hand, and looked out at the sea of faces. They were no longer just my neighbors, my friends, the people I had grown up with. They were the silent witnesses, the co-conspirators, the ones who had chosen to look away. And in their eyes, I saw not just shock, not just revulsion, but a dawning, terrible shame. The shame of a town that had sold its soul for a lie. The shame of a community that had sacrificed an innocent girl on the altar of its own comfort, its own denial. The roar of the waterfall had been silenced, replaced by the deafening roar of the truth. And in the silence that followed, there was no comfort, no closure. Just the cold, hard reality of what had been lost, and what could never be regained. The cinematic payoff was not a moment of triumph, but a moment of devastating, soul-crushing clarity. The credits had rolled, but the story was far from over. The weeks that followed were a blur of legal proceedings, media frenzy, and the slow, painful process of a town coming to terms with its own ugliness. The story went national, a sensational tale of small-town corruption, of a monster hiding in plain sight. Our quiet, forgotten corner of the world was suddenly the center of the universe. A spectacle of shame and recrimination. Thompson, my father, and Dave were all convicted. Their trials a mere formality in the face of the overwhelming evidence. Thompson, arrogant and defiant to the end, was sentenced to life without parole. My father, a broken, silent man, received a lesser sentence for his cooperation. And Dave, a tragic figure consumed by his own guilt, took his own life in his jail cell before his sentencing, leaving behind a note that simply said, "I'm sorry." The town was fractured, broken, its foundations of trust and community shattered. Neighbor turned against neighbor, friend against friend, as the full extent of the conspiracy was revealed. The silence that had held the town together for so long was replaced by a cacophony of accusations and blame. I left the force. The uniform a constant, suffocating reminder of the life I had lost, the man I had become. I was a hero to some, a pariah to others, a ghost in my own hometown. I couldn't walk down the street without feeling the weight of their stares, their whispers, their judgment. I sold my house. The house I had grown up in, the house that was filled with the ghosts of my family, and bought a small, isolated cabin on the other side of the lake, not far from where Frank Miller had met his end. I needed the silence, the solitude, the roar of the waterfall, a distant, muffled memory. One day, there was a knock on my door. It was Clara, Maya's mother. She was older now, her face a roadmap of grief and loss, but her eyes, Maya's eyes, were clear and steady. We sat on my porch, the silence between us comfortable, familiar. We didn't talk about the trial, about the men who had destroyed our lives. We talked about Maya. She told me stories about her childhood, about her dreams, about the fierce, unwavering love she had for her daughter. I told her about our secrets, the way her laughter could make the world feel right. We cried together. Not for what we had lost, but for what we had found. A shared grief, a common bond, a quiet understanding that transcended words. Before she left, she handed me a small wrapped box. "She would have wanted you to have this," she said, her voice soft. Inside was Maya's diary. The real one. Not the one filled with fear and dread, but the one filled with her hopes, her dreams, her love. I spent the rest of the day reading it, her words a balm to my wounded soul. She wrote about our future, about the life we would have together, about the children we would raise. She wrote about her love for me, a love that was as constant, as unwavering as the roar of the waterfall. The last entry was dated the day before she disappeared. "I'm going to tell him," she wrote. I'm going to tell Ethan everything. He'll know what to do. He'll protect me. He's my hero. The words were a knife in my heart, a bittersweet reminder of the boy I had been, the man I had failed to be. I visit her grave now, a simple stone marker in the town cemetery, overlooking the falls. Her name is etched in the cold, hard granite, a permanent, silent testament to the life she never lived. I bring her flowers, the purple wildflowers she loved, and I talk to her, my voice a low, quiet whisper against the roar of the water. I tell her about my day, about the book I'm reading, about the changing of the seasons. I tell her that I'm sorry. Sometimes, in the quiet moments, I can almost hear her voice, a faint, tinkling melody on the wind. She tells me that it's okay, that she's at peace, that I need to forgive myself, but I can't, not yet. The waterfall still roars, a constant, eternal reminder of the promise I couldn't keep. But now, it's not just the sound of forgetting. It's the sound of remembrance. It's the sound of a love that was lost, but never forgotten. It's the sound of a truth that was buried, but never died. And in the roar of that water, in the silence of my own heart, I find a strange, haunting kind of peace. A bittersweet healing, a quiet acceptance of the ghosts that will forever walk beside me. The story is over, but the echo of her laughter, of her love, will linger forever. Haunting, beautiful melody in the soundtrack of my life.